Long ago, in a quiet village where the ground had cracked and the rivers had run dry, there lived a woman who carried water for everyone. She was not a queen. She had no magic. But when even the strongest men gave up hope, she stood alone and challenged the gods. This is not a story of war. This is a story of wisdom, of one woman against the sky. Stay with me, and I will tell you how the village water giver outwitted the rain goddess herself. Before we dive into this story, take one moment. Click subscribe to join us on more journeys through Africa's greatest tales. You won't want to miss the twists in this story, so stay with me until the very end. Let me take you to a land where the trees once stood tall and proud, their green crowns swaying in time with the wind's laughter. A place where rivers once flowed like silver snakes between soft hills, bringing life to every root and every foot that crossed them. That place was the village of Kombeni. But the Kombeni of our story had changed. The sky above the village had turned pale and tired. The sun, once a friend that warmed crops and dried laundry, now refused to rest. For 50 long days, it burned fiercely above Kombeni, never blinking, as if it were angry at the earth below. The fields cracked, the streams vanished, and the people, they began to change. At first, they had prayed, then they had waited, then they had grown quiet. Even the goats, once noisy and mischievous, walked slowly through dust-covered courtyards, their ribs showing like the fingers of a starving man. The children no longer played chase between huts. Instead, they sat under trees with dry eyes and dusty throats, chewing quietly on brittle pieces of cassava that tasted more like bark than food. At night, the air was heavy. The stars seemed to flicker like dying embers. And in the silence, the village could hear its own heartbeat, slow, tired, and unsure. But not everyone had given up. There was a woman who still rose before the birds sang, who still walked, who still believed. Her name was Mama Lati. Mama Lati was not a priestess. She had no beads or charms around her neck. She was not a rich trader or the wife of a chief. She was the village water carrier. Every morning, long before the cock's cry split the air, Mama Lati would tie a cloth around her waist, wrap another around her head, and lift 2 large calabashes, one for each shoulder. A third she carried in her hand, the smallest, but the most precious. That one was for the sick and the old, who could no longer fetch water themselves. You see, the main river had long disappeared. The shallow wells had turned into pits of dust. But Mama Lati knew a secret spring, deep in the forest of Mabarunga, hidden between 2 fallen baobab trees. She never told anyone where it was, not out of selfishness, but because some truths must be walked to, not told. And so every morning, she made the long journey. The path to the spring was not straight. It curled like a sleeping python around rocks and hills. But Mama Lati's feet knew it well. They had walked it since she was a girl, barefoot and curious, helping her own mother carry water before she ever knew what hardship meant. As she walked, her ankles cracked slightly from age, and her back curved with the memory of many years. But her spirit never bent. People watched her from doorways, silent and unsure. Some nodded, some muttered, some even frowned. "She must be hiding water," one woman whispered. "She goes off every morning and comes back with her pots full. Who knows what she's doing in that forest?" said another. But Mama Lati didn't answer. She simply walked. Her only reply was the creak of her steps, the gentle slosh of water in her calabashes, and the old lullaby she hummed softly to herself. A song her mother had taught her, and her grandmother before that. Inside the village, things were growing tense. The chief, a large man named Okamfo Dedi, had grown restless. His sons no longer spoke much. His wives argued over the last bit of palm oil, and even the sacred talking drum had been silent for days. On the 50th day of sun, he called the people to the square. Old men, women with babies tied to their backs, hungry boys with dry lips, all gathered, squinting under the harsh light. Chief Okamfo Dedi, booming voice. My people, we have waited, we have prayed, but the sky does not answer. I say this now, we must make one final offering to the rain goddess. The elders say she has turned her face from us. Let us offer her 3 white doves, a basket of yam, and a sacred song. If she listens, we shall have rain. If not, we must prepare to leave Kombeni. A heavy silence followed. Leave? Leave the village of their ancestors? Leave the graves of their mothers? The mango trees they planted with their bare hands? Murmurs grew. Some nodded. Others wept quietly. A few walked away, unable to bear the thought. But Mama Lati stood still, leaning slightly on her water staff. When all had spoken, she stepped forward. Mama Lati, gently. Chief, my people, you speak of offerings, yams, doves, songs. That is fine. But the rain goddess is not like a merchant at the market. You cannot trade your prayers for her tears. People turned toward her. Some frowned. A few muttered again. But the chief raised his hand. Speak, Mama. She stepped onto the stone circle in the middle of the square, the one only used for sacred words. Mama Lati. You forget. The rain goddess is not deaf. She is angry. She gave us many rains in the past, and we wasted them. We cut trees too fast. We poisoned streams. We thanked the sun, but ignored the clouds. Now, she has closed her sky to us. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Mama Lati, firmly. You want to beg her. I say no. I say you must speak her language, not with doves, but with truth. The people didn't know what to make of her words. Some thought she was just tired. Others saw something in her eyes, something strong and deep, like the spring she always returned from. The chief stepped forward again. Chief Okamfo Dedi. And what would you do, old one? Mama Lati looked up at the blazing sky. Mama Lati. I will go to Njua Njua Hill. I will speak to her myself. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Njua Njua, the hill where it was said the rain goddess once wept after being betrayed by a mortal man. No one had climbed it in generations. It was a sacred place, forbidden to most. Chief, gravely, you would go alone? Mama Lati, nodding, I must. And so, while others slept that night, dreaming of wet rice fields and full pots, Mama Lati packed her things in silence. 3 items only: a small wooden cup carved by her mother, a gourd of fresh spring water, and an old song, one she hadn't sung in over 30 years. As the moon rose over Kombeni, she set off, her shadow long behind her, her face calm. To challenge the sky, you must first know the earth. And Mama Lati knew both. The night after Mama Lati made her promise to climb the sacred hill, the village of Kombeni did not sleep well. Some tossed and turned in their clay homes. Others lay awake under the stars, whispering quiet prayers or staring into the dark. The wind carried dry dust through empty courtyards, scratching windows and eyes alike. And somewhere near the center of the village, an elder murmured, "What if she fails?" By the next morning, the people of Kombeni were already gathering near the chief's compound. The news had spread quickly. Mama Lati was going to climb Njua Njua Hill alone. Children spoke about it as if it were a ghost story. Women whispered while cooking what little food they had left. And the elders, the ones who remembered the old stories, sat in silence with worry on their faces. It had been many years since anyone dared step foot on Njua Njua. They said it was cursed, that the rain goddess still wept there at night, that she turned visitors into birds and let them fly, lost, across the dry sky. But Mama Lati had already begun to prepare, and the village was left with only two things: waiting and blame. Blame is like fire during drought. It spreads fast and needs very little to burn. Soon, eyes began to turn not just toward the gods, but toward each other. "It's the blacksmith," someone shouted one morning. "He uses too much fire. He has offended the spirits of the wind." "No," said another. "It's the new traders. They bring cursed goods from other villages." One angry voice near the market cried, "It's that girl Suma. Her baby was born under the wrong moon. That's a bad omen." People were afraid, and when fear has no answers, it builds its own. But one name was whispered more than others: Mama Lati. "She returns from the forest with full pots," said a narrow-eyed man with cracked heels. "And she shares the water, but who knows where it really comes from." An old woman named Yaya Na, known for her sharp tongue and sharper ears, added, "She never told anyone where her spring is. Not even when my daughter was sick with fever. Maybe it's not even a spring. Maybe it's a charm." Others nodded. Suspicion is easy to agree with when your stomach is empty and your throat dry. Still, some defended her. "She has carried water for us for years," said a young man named Timo, whose mother had once been healed with Mama Lati's spring water. "She gives without asking. What more do you want?" But Timo was outnumbered by whispers. Fear continued to grow, coiling itself around every hut and every heart. In the center of Kombeni, inside the compound of Chief Okomfo Dedi, the chief sat in deep thought. His face, once round with pride, now sagged with worry. His feet rested in a wooden basin of cool water, brought earlier that morning by, of course, Mama Lati. 3 of his elders sat nearby, chewing cola nuts and murmuring softly. Elder Juma, grumbling, "She is brave, but foolish. The rain goddess does not speak to common women." Elder Tendo, "Maybe, but she is the only one doing anything." The chief raised his hand for silence. Chief Okomfo Dedi, "Whether foolish or brave, she is the only one walking toward the storm. We must let her go." One of his wives, seated nearby and fanning herself with a tired leaf, muttered, "And if she never returns?" The room fell quiet again. Meanwhile, inside her small hut on the edge of the village, Mama Lati prepared without ceremony. She laid out 3 simple things on a mat: her old water staff, made from a strong tree branch, worn smooth by years of walking; a gourd of water, taken from the secret spring that morning, cool and sweet-smelling; and a small leather pouch containing a dried flower, a carved cowrie shell, and a folded piece of red cloth. These were not weapons or charms. They were memories, items from her mother and her mother's mother. They reminded her of who she was and who she walked for. As she packed, a knock came at her doorway. 2 small children stood there, one barefoot boy and his sister holding a small broken cup. They looked up at her with dry lips and hopeful eyes. Boy, softly, "Mama Lati, do you have some water?" She didn't speak. She simply bent down, opened the gourd, and filled the cracked cup. The children drank like flowers after the first rain. Before leaving, the girl looked up and said, "My mother said you're going to find the rain. Is that true?" Mama Lati smiled, a tired but warm smile. "Mama Lati, I am going to remind the sky who we are." That evening, as the sun sank behind the hilltops like a tired giant, the village gathered for one final meeting. Mama Lati stood before them, her back straight, her hands calm. The chief stepped forward. Chief Okomfo Dedi. Mama Lati, do you go of your own will? Mama Lati. I do. Chief. Do you carry with you the spirit of Kombeni? Mama Lati. I carry its breath, its bones, its promise. The chief bowed slightly. Then, to the surprise of many, he took off the royal ring from his right hand, a carved piece of wood soaked in the sacred river years ago, and gave it to her. Chief, give this to the rain goddess. If she remembers me, let her remember that I still believe. Mama Lati accepted it quietly and placed it in her pouch. The people watched. Some cried, some remained cold and uncertain. But no one stopped her. That night, Mama Lati sat under the Njua Njua moon, sharpening the soles of her sandals with a small rock. She looked up at the stars, then down at the dusty earth. She whispered to no one. Mama Lati, softly, let my feet speak where my words cannot. And then she lay down under the stars, with only her staff as pillow. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly, but no clouds yet stirred. Tomorrow, the climb would begin. The morning Mama Lati left for Njua Njua Hill. The village of Kombeni watched from afar. No one followed. No one spoke. But every heart walked with her. She carried no banner, no drum, no warrior's blade. Only a wooden staff and a water gourd pressed against her back. The same gourd she had used for years to feed thirsty mouths, now trembling slightly with every step. As the sun peeked over the hills, Mama Lati entered the forest of Mabarunga, where green shadows danced and old gods listened. Inside the forest, the air was cooler. Leaves whispered secrets to one another as she passed, and branches moved without wind, as if bowing to someone older than themselves. Mama Lati walked steadily. Her feet pressed the earth like she was greeting an old friend, each step slow and full of memory. This was the same forest her mother had brought her to as a girl, teaching her how to walk quietly, how to listen, how to find water where none seemed to be. And now the forest remembered her. A bird flew across her path, black and blue, its feathers shimmering like wet stone. Mama Lati stopped. Mama Lati, softly. Messenger. In the old stories, birds like this one appeared before great changes. The elders called them Nikiki, spirit scouts. She smiled faintly, then continued walking. The deeper she went, the narrower the trail became. Thick vines hung from branches like sleeping snakes. Some she stepped over. Others she gently pushed aside with her staff. The forest floor was damp but dry above. All around, the trees seemed to lean closer, listening. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air. Not a bird, not a monkey, something else. She froze. From behind a fallen log, a low growl followed. A shape moved. A wild dog, thin and scarred, stepped into view. Its ribs showed through its fur, and its eyes were sunken with hunger. Mama Lati stood still. The dog bared its teeth. But then, something strange. The dog stopped, sniffed the air, and backed away. Its nose twitched at her gourd. Then, slowly, it turned and ran. She watched it vanish into the underbrush, her heartbeat steady. Mama Lati, calmly. Even beasts know who carries the gift. She continued. Around midday, Mama Lati reached the tree of the three mouths, an old, wide tree with 3 hollow openings at its base. The tree had stood there for generations. Some said it had eaten the bones of fallen warriors. Others claimed it held the voices of wandering spirits. Mama Lati knelt before it. From her pouch, she removed the red cloth, folded many times, and placed it gently in the middle hollow. This cloth had belonged to her grandmother, who died praying for rain during the drought of her own time. Mama Lati, softly, let her spirit speak louder than mine. She poured a few drops of water at the tree's roots. The ground hissed softly, like it was thirsty for more. As she continued walking, the sky began to change. Clouds formed slowly, but not gray, white and lazy, watching her. Then, the path split. Two trails stretched ahead, both worn but different. To the left, a narrow trail with low branches and thorny bushes, darker, quieter. To the right, a clearer path, wider, with sunlight spilling through the canopy. Mama Lati did not hesitate. She turned left. Pain was the teacher of truth, her mother once said, and easy paths rarely reached the right place. Thorns scraped her arms and legs. One branch caught her head wrap and pulled it off. She did not stop. She ducked, stepped, climbed over fallen logs. Her breath grew heavy, but her feet stayed sure. And then, she came to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing stood a circle of flat stones, arranged like seats around an invisible fire. And in the center of that circle, nothing. But the air was heavy. She felt it immediately, like walking into a room where someone had just argued. She sat on one of the stones and closed her eyes. The forest held its breath. And then, the voices began. Soft at first, then louder. Woman's voice, distant, echoing. You left the spring behind. Man's voice, stern. You share water but not truth. Child's voice, sad. Where were you when the rain stopped? Mama Lati opened her eyes. No one was there. The voices were not of the forest. They were from within her. Guilt, doubt, fear. She sat quietly, letting them speak. After a while, they faded, and she whispered to herself, Mama Lati, I walk with doubt, but I still walk. The forest stirred again. A breeze passed through the clearing. She stood up and saw it. A blue feather lying on the center stone, the sign of the rain goddess. As the day dimmed, Mama Lati finally reached the base of Njua Njua Hill. It rose high above the forest, its sides jagged and covered in ancient moss. The top was hidden by mist, but even from below she could feel the power humming above. She looked up. The climb would be hard. Her legs ached. Her throat was dry. She took the gourd and poured a single drop of water onto her tongue. Then, planting her staff into the ground beside her, she whispered a vow. Mama Lati, firmly, I do not come to beg. I come to speak. Then she began the climb. The sun was gone by the time Mama Lati reached the flat stone at the top of Nuanjua. Her arms trembled. Her legs bled from two sharp rocks. Her hands were scratched raw from gripping roots and jagged stone, but her eyes shone like fire. Before her stood a single stone basin, dry. Beside it, a ring of symbols carved into the earth. Symbols that hadn't been touched in a generation. She knelt and placed the chief's ring inside the basin. Then she poured the last of her water onto the carved symbols. Nothing happened. The air was silent. Not even insects moved. But Mama Lati did not move either. She sat, waiting, breathing, remembering every child who had asked for a drink, every mother who had cried over a dry pot, every footstep she'd taken for the village. And then, at last, a single drop fell from the sky, then another, and another. Mama Lati looked up. Rain. Real rain. Rain. Not thunder. Not storm. Just rain. Gentle at first, like a whisper after years of silence. Each drop kissed the stone basin at the summit of Njua Njua Hill. Each drop found its way into the grooves Mama Lati had poured water into, those old sacred symbols carved by hands long forgotten. Mama Lati did not move. She sat on the cold stone, eyes wide open, heart beating with ancient rhythm. Then, a sound, not footsteps, not thunder, a presence. The mist at the top of the hill began to swirl, like water boiling in reverse, cool instead of hot. A A circle of wind formed around the stone basin. Leaves danced, dust lifted. The carved symbols glowed faintly, like fireflies hiding just under the surface of the earth. And then, a figure emerged. She was not as the tales said, not a woman made of clouds, not a giant who carried rivers in her arms. She was tall, yes, but made of shifting things, parts of smoke, bark, and water. Her hair flowed upward like a tree, reaching for rain. Her eyes were deep, not black, not white, just deep, like wells that remembered every child's cry, every lost crop, every broken prayer. Mama Lati lowered her eyes, but did not bow. The goddess spoke, not with a voice, but with a presence inside the air. Rain goddess, calm, echoing. You bring me the chief's ring. Mama Lati. Yes. Rain goddess. You bring water to a thirsty hill. Mama Lati. I bring memory. Rain goddess. And yet your people forgot me. The rain paused. Just like that, it stopped, as if time held its breath. Mama Lati looked up slowly. Her voice was steady, but low. Mama Lati. They feared you stopped listening. Rain. Goddess. I never stopped. But they offered words, and no sacrifice. They prayed with mouths, but not with hearts. A long moment passed. Even the wind dared not speak. Mama Lati removed the blue feather from her pouch and placed it next to the ring in the basin. Mama Lati. Then let this offering speak. This feather came from a spirit bird. It flew before me, guiding my path. I come not for myself, I come for my people. The goddess looked down at the items, ring, feather, the last trace of spring water. She blinked once. The mist behind her shifted like a curtain being drawn. Then the hill changed. The stones melted away. Mama Lati suddenly stood in the past, a vision called forth by the goddess. She was no longer on top of Njua Njua. She stood in Kombeni, but many, many years ago. Green trees, full rivers, laughter, children splashing in puddles, women singing while washing gourds, fires burning gently under iron pots. And there, at the center, stood a young girl, small, sharp-eyed, quiet. It was herself, years ago. But no one looked at her. She was just part of the background, unseen, unnoticed, until a woman spoke harshly. Woman's voice. Leave the pot, Latti. The adults will carry the water. Young Latti obeyed, and from that moment, she always carried her own pot, in secret. The vision faded. Rain. Goddess. You were ignored, but you remembered. You were quiet, but you listened. You were not chosen, but you chose. Mama Latti's lips trembled. Mama Lati. I never wanted power, only water. Rain goddess. Then why do you climb mountains? Mama Lati was silent for a long time. Then, finally, Mama Lati. Because no one else would. The rain goddess stepped forward. Her body shimmered now, clear water and silver mist. Rain goddess. Kombeni must remember. Not just rain, but gratitude. Not just prayer, but humility. If I return with conditions. Mama Lati, carefully. What must we do? The goddess raised a hand. From her palm fell 3 drops of water, each shaped like a small stone. They struck the basin and turned into solid beads. Rain goddess. These are the seeds of remembrance. One must be buried at the first harvest. One must be dropped into the village's largest drum before every festival. The last must be placed on your tongue, Mama Lati, before your final breath. Mama Lati's eyes widened. Mama Lati whispers, to carry the memory until death? Rain goddess. Until rebirth. Mama Lati reached out her hand. She took the 3 water stones and placed them into her pouch. The pouch glowed briefly, then quieted. The goddess leaned in closer. Her breath was cool, like shade under a tree. Rain goddess, softly. Tell your people. The rain is not a gift. It is a mirror. Mama Lati nodded. and then the goddess stepped backward, her body lifted into the mist, and just as she had appeared, she was gone. And then the skies opened. Real rain, not polite drops, full, rich, hungry rain. It poured over Njua Njua Hill like a blessing returning home. It danced on stones, rushed into cracks, filled dry roots, and kissed Mama Lati's face. She laughed. For the first time in years, she laughed. Arms wide, eyes closed, face to the heavens. As the rain poured down, Mama Lati began her descent. The stones were slippery. The mud pulled at her sandals. But her heart was light. The forest below welcomed her with movement and song. Frogs croaked, leaves shimmered, and rivers began to stir in their beds. When she reached the base of the hill, she looked back only once, and she whispered, "Mama Lati, I climbed to remind you of us, and I return to remind them of you." The rain came before Mama Lati did, long before her figure reappeared on the dusty path leading back to Kombeni. The skies had opened above the village with a memory too big for words. Children stood in open doorways with arms stretched wide. Old men lifted faces, streaked with years, and wept like boys. Mothers ran barefoot into the fields, not to save the crops, but to kneel among them and say, "Thank you." The village that had forgotten how to wait now remembered how to kneel. It began with a single drop, as always. Falling at the edge of the main square, it struck the top of the old stone drum. Plock. Then another, and another. And suddenly, the silence broke. Drummers emerged from their homes. Women began ululating. Children screamed, not in fear but in joy, the wild kind of joy that forgets pain and leaps straight into freedom. Water ran down rooftops. Goats danced in the mud. The air smelled like roots waking up. Rain had returned to Kombeni. Somewhere between mist and afternoon light, someone cried out, "Villager, she's coming! Mama Lati is coming!" They ran toward her, not just children, but men, women, the chief, even the old blind potter. Her robe was soaked, her walking stick was muddy, but her back was straight and her eyes glowed like dawn. The villagers surrounded her, but said nothing at first. Some just touched her arms. Some knelt and kissed the edge of her robe. Others could not speak, only cry. And Mama Lati? She said only 3 words. Mama Lati, softly. The rain remembers. That evening, the village square burned with firelight and song. No one waited for the drum to start. People danced in wet clothes, bare feet stamping on soaked earth. They sang old songs, songs the youth had never heard, but somehow knew the words to. At the center of the square, Mama Lati stood holding a small, glowing bead, one of the rain goddess's sacred water stones. She turned to the chief, who stood humbled without his crown. Mama Lati, this is the seed of remembrance. Chief, quietly, and what must we do with it? Mama Lati, bury it with the first yam of harvest. Let the earth remember what your mouth forgets. The chief bowed his head. Mama Lati handed him the bead. As he placed it gently into a clay bowl, thunder rolled across the sky, not harsh, not angry, just present. The second water stone was placed in front of the village drum. Mama Lati dipped it in fresh river water. Yes, river water, because the river had started flowing again, and gently set it inside the drum's hollow body. At that moment, every drummer in Kombeni stopped and bowed their heads. Then they beat the drum once. A deep, rich note rolled through the village like a memory returned. Mama Lati, before every festival, before any dance, this stone must be blessed. Let joy begin with remembrance. Later, when the food came, thick ugali, roasted cassava, pumpkin seeds, wild honey, the children sat around Mama Lati, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. One girl, maybe 6 years old, climbed into Mama Lati's lap and asked, "Child, Did you fight the rain goddess? Mama Lati smiled. Mama Lati, no, I listened to her. Child, but why didn't anyone else? Mama Lati paused. Then she spoke gently, so every child could hear. Mama Lati, because sometimes grown-ups get so busy talking, they forget how to listen. The children nodded, and one boy whispered, "Boy, I'll remember." That night, under a sky now full of stars, the river woman came. She hadn't been seen in years, not since her son died during the 3rd year of drought. She stepped slowly into the square, wearing white beads and holding a small pot. Without a word, she walked to Mama Lati and knelt. River woman, softly. I stopped singing to the river, but now it sings again. Forgive me. Mama Lati reached down and lifted her. Mama Lati, it is not me who must forgive. It is you who must remember to sing again. And so, the river woman sang. Her voice was cracked at first, but the villagers joined her, and together they sang the river back to life. Days passed. The rain did not fall every day, but it came often. The fields greened, the river swelled. Even the old spring behind Mama Lati's hut began to trickle again. But one thing remained, the final water stone. It rested in Mama Lati's pouch, close to her heart. One morning, she gathered the youth of the village and led them to the spring. She sat by its edge and held up the last bead. Mama Lati, this is the stone for my tongue. When I am gone, it will return me to the rain goddess. Child, worried. Don't go. Mama Lati smiled. Mama Lati, not yet. But one day, and when that day comes, the stone must be placed on my tongue by one who remembers. She looked into their young, wide eyes. Mama Lati, firmly, will you remember? All in chorus. We will. She nodded. That was enough. The village of Kombeni did not forget again. Each year, at the start of harvest, they buried the first yam with quiet ceremony. Before every festival, the drummers dropped water on the sacred stone within their drum, and every child was taught to sit at the spring and listen, not to stories alone, but to silence. Mama Lati remained among them for many more seasons. She never wore the chief's ring. She never claimed a title. She only carried her old gourd and told stories of mist, feathers, and a hill where rain was born again. Dear viewer, this tale is not just about water. It is about remembrance, about listening when the world grows quiet, about standing when no one else will, and about knowing that sometimes the most powerful warrior carries a gourd, not a sword. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something sacred, or if it made you remember a time when the rain fell sweet on your roof, please hit the subscribe button. We bring you powerful world stories every week, stories of ancestors, wisdom, mystery, and the spirit world. Turn on the notification bell and visit our channel for more tales like how the village water giver outwitted the rain goddess. Until next time, walk gently and remember to listen.